I met Stephen and Gloria Decater a few years ago when I joined their farm. Since then, they have been growing my food for me, and I've had the opportunity to go up and visit them several times and talk with them a lot and get to know them as people. And they never cease to amaze me. These people are intelligent, amazingly hardworking, generous to a fault, and visionary. They have the courage to be living what most of us are only talking about. So you can imagine how thrilling it is for me to be able to say in this day and age that not only do I know the people who grow my food, but they are my friends and they're my heroes. And I'm so happy that they're here tonight to share with all of you what they do. So Stephen and Gloria, please join me.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight and being interested in trying to create a new agriculture in this area. You know, we always want to remember that it's the people eating the food that create the agriculture, really, because those are the people that support whatever kind of agricultural system we have. And we now see that the agricultural system we have needs some pretty radical changes. So it's really exciting to me tonight to be here with you and know that more and more people are starting to see the need for these changes, and that can fuel the reality of making those changes. So I'd like to start by giving a brief description of our farm and how it developed over the last 30 years, just as an example of a community-based farm. And then I want to talk about alternate economic forms, associative economy, and let's see here, let me turn this on. And community-based farming and CSAs, and what that term means at this point in time, and how we operate a CSA, and also a little bit about what are the possibilities for community involvement in community-based farms. So our farm, we started in Covelo in about 1973, and on property that we were caretaking, and we were cultivating pretty much by hand in a French-intensive approach, and we were basically subsistence farming for the first 8 years, and then working off the farm part-time for cash income. Then in about the early 1980s, we helped start a farmer's market in Covelo, and we're actually the principal growers in the market. There was another retired couple. But that market barely could make a living for one couple, let alone 2 or 3 or more. It was limited. And so in 1986, we heard about a new way of organizing farms that started in Japan and Europe and was brought to this country, and organizing them as consumer producer cooperatives, basically. And in Japan, it came to be known as TK, or seeing the farmer's face on the food. And in this country, it came to be known as community-supported agriculture. So, as soon as we heard about this idea, we said, this is the way it should be. And so in 1988, we met with a group of people in San Francisco, many of whom had visited the farm, our farm, with their kids, because we host school class visits on our farm. And so we knew several people, got a group of about 15 people together, and Gloria and I went down and presented a very rudimentary budget for growing the food for these people, and a crop projection of what we would be able to grow for them, and a little history of our, history as growers. And we came back, and within a few days, we received a check in the mail for the whole season. And that was a turning point, a major turning point in our lives, because for the first time as growers, we had consistent support at the beginning of the year and knew what resources we had to work with, and that we would in fact be compensated for our work. And it was a tremendously positive that happened. Most or a number of those 15 families are still part of our CSA today, and the next year the membership doubled and then increased, and today we're serving about 50 to 60 households here in Mendocino County with our Tuesday harvest, and about 100 households in San Francisco with our Friday harvest. So we're a commercially producing farm, we're feeding people, but the interesting thing is that none of the food that we grow or the money that comes back to support that food production goes through the market system. We're an actual working example of a alternative market and agricultural system that is going on side by side with the present market system. Everything that we grow on the farm is utilized by this community of about 300 people between Mendocino County and San Francisco. And all of the money to support the operation of our 40-acre farm comes back from those members. Let's see. So what we saw from this is that in order to have a sustainable agriculture, we have to actually create also a sustainable economic system, a different economic form. Because in the present market system, the relationship that we have is that we're asking the farmer to put in the time and the money to produce the product for us as eaters, and make that commitment of time and money and energy, but there's no complementary commitment on the consumer's part. So, what happens is that this doesn't really, in the end, support the farmer and becomes very difficult for farmers. And it's really the farmers that are creating the basis for all of the other activity that we have in our communities, in that if there's no food there to begin with, we can't do a lot of the other things that we might want to do. So the farmers are really the treasures to a community. And I think that we need to change the economic relationship so that the farmers' needs are truly compensated so that they can perform that work on behalf of the community that they're dedicating their energy and life to.
So you move up move that up higher. Thanks.
Okay, so what could we have as a non-market economic form? What would it be like? We could call this form an associative economy. It's an association of producers and consumers for whatever the product is, and it could apply to things beyond agricultural products actually also. But we're starting from the basis of taking care of the producer, in this case the farmer, also the users, the people eating the food, and the environment. That's the bottom line. All of the players are the bottom line in an associative economy. And there's not a bottom line of creating profit for investors. We also can approach investment for infrastructure from a different direction. And so there's no intent in an associative economy community farm to accrue profit to private individuals. And in a sense, you could call it nonprofit farming in that regard. There is a goal of compensating the growers and the producers with a living wage adequately, but there's no goal of creating private gain out of the farm. So another aspect of the conventional economic food system, market system, is that the growers and the consumers are basically separated and kind of anonymous to each other, and in a way alienated, and also in a way competing with each other. You know, the farmer's trying to get enough to survive and continue doing their work on that end, and then the consumers on the other end thinking that, you know, the important thing is maybe lower price, but not realizing that that is eventually going to play back to the farmer, and maybe that farmer's not going to be there, you know, in the future when they're needed. So the dynamic that comes out of that relationship is more one of struggle and strife and misunderstanding, lack of recognition, even antagonism. With an associative economic system, the growers and the eaters are recognizing that their interests are not separate, but actually the same, mutually joined. And so then it becomes a matter of the eaters taking care of their own nourishment, also means taking care of the land and the farmers. And the farmers, it means taking care of their life, means taking care of their eaters, their members. And so this creates a completely different economic dynamic by having conscious relationship and association. We create a completely different economic dynamic. And it creates awareness and understanding, cooperation, mutual support, even brotherhood. And if there's anything we need in our economic process today, I would say it's some of those qualities. So this is an avenue to doing that. Okay. Now we're going to go to community-based farming. No. Actually, we're going to take a detour first and talk about CSA a little bit. And CSAs were brought to this country on the East Coast about 1986. So there's about a 20-year history now. There's around 1,500 to 2,000 CSAs in the country. And the original excitement about the concept of CSA was that it introduced a new, successful, and alternative social and economic approaches, which we're just talking about, and into this landscape of farms that weren't thriving. Then over the past 20 years, this CSA idea kind of became a buzzword for hard-pressed independent farmers, and many people have kind of lost track of the original social and economic principles, which I've just been trying to explain. And so this term CSA has gotten spread over a wide spectrum of businesses. So you have on one hand, in one extreme, like the box, which no farmer is growing the food. There's not a farm there. The distributor basically is buying the food from other farms, assembling it in a box, giving it out as a service to people, and it stays completely within the realm of kind of market economic approaches. That's the extreme on that side. On the other side of the spectrum was the original idea of CSA, which is that the farm and the farmers give a budget to the members, and the members meet the operating costs of that budget. And so in effect, the members are not actually buying food, they're actually supporting the operation of a farm. It's two very different things. And if the farm is well operated, the result will be the food that is needed. So CSA is not really about another way of marketing, which is kind of what it's become a little bit today in some areas. It's really about sustaining our farms through the power of relationship and community, and transforming our economic life so that it brings compassion, support, and brotherhood. It does require different consciousness from members to work with the CSA farm for their food. They need to give input to their farmers so that the crops can be adjusted to meet people's needs as far as possible. And learning to utilize the food that's seasonal is also an aspect. And learning to store food and use it is also an aspect. So it does take a bit of a mind switch to work with a farm for your food, as opposed to going straight into a market and things are there from whatever season, from whatever part of the world, and so on. But we can still achieve abundance on a local level. It just means we're not going to have tomatoes in May, probably, unless they're in a greenhouse. Or we're going to have tomatoes later in the year, but in May we're going to have wonderful fresh greens and all kinds of good things to eat still. But the maximum potential for creating social change is really through the CSA form, not through the market form, through an associative economic form, not through a market form. That's where we have the greatest leverage to change some of these factors. Okay, so now we would like to look at community-based farms. What is that? Well, I explained that the basic premise is that the community of people is meeting the budget for the food production, and the food production is planned specifically for that community of people, and the food is utilized by that community of people. So people are actually supporting the operation of the farm, not just buying food at a price, which in our present economy is the market price. No one knows what that really is. We don't know if we've really paid for the production costs of that food or not. And now we're seeing, as we hit the decline of oil and so on, and environmental problems, that we aren't really paying for that cost. Okay, there's an intent amongst the group, the farmers and the members, to create and maintain a permanent farming operation so that that farm can go on as a permanent resource for the community, providing food for the community. There's also a sharing of risk in this case. If there's adverse weather or something, it's not totally on the farmer's hands. But in the 18 years that we've been growing food, through our CSA for people, there's been, some seasons of more of one crop and less of another, but there's never been a total failure of, a large portion of the harvest. So I think that, the risk is not so extreme, but at least it is a shared risk in a way that is not found in a market economy. The capitalization of the farm infrastructure can be made by the farmer, but also assets that are needed in the farm, maybe equipment or other things that might be needed, could be held by a member of the farm or even an interested outside party and leased to the farm for a maintenance fee, for instance. And especially in starting a community-based farm where there's going to be startup costs for equipment and materials and so on. This is a place where someone that can hold some of that investment and make tools available to begin with, then at a later point the farmer possibly can even purchase those tools and equipment. Another way of approaching it would be for a nonprofit community development corporation, for instance, to own those tools or equipment and make them available to several community farms in an area. That would also be a way of approaching it without private capital investment. So often we see these uncontrolled market forces result in the farm's destruction, and we also see them forcing the farms into being cashed out for development. I think that the non-market associative economic business forms can cushion the farm from that and can allow it to survive. And also by placing the land ownership in nonprofit or shared equity forms of land ownership, we can take it out of the situation where it needs to be cashed out for private gain. So, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Okay, another interesting feature with community-based farms is that you could have one community-based farm serving 300 people in one site, and you could have another community-based farm right next door serving another 300 people, and they're not in competition with each other. They're working side by side, doing their job, and they're not really competing. And so that creates a whole different situation. You can also, and we haven't developed this in Mendocino County yet, but we have developed it in San Francisco with our members. You can have several community-based farms supplying different parts of what would be a total diet. So in our case, our farm supplies vegetables and eggs and meat. We are partnering with another farm out of the Central Valley that, to our San Francisco members, supplies all kinds of fresh stone fruit. They grow wonderful peaches and apricots. We did this not by buying food from that other farm, but by inviting those farmers to come and meet our member group, introducing them, and then they operate with the same member group. And so the farm members actually have several farms that they're in relationship with. And then we also have a former apprentice that is providing grains, flour mixes, freshly ground flour mixes that she grows the grains for, dried beans, seeds, as a grain share. And so you could combine several community-based farms in an area to provide a much broader diet of food.
Stephen, you're at 20.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So, we've talked a little bit about who operates, who are the parts of a CSA. There's the farmer. Farmer makes a crop plan, the farm plan, the annual operating budget, operates the farm, contributes farm news to the newsletter, maintains income and expense records. Core group. These are out of the membership. They act as advisors to the farm on farm crop budget plans. They help coordinate membership and farm events, communications, organization within the CSA. They can represent the CSA along with farmers at conferences and community situations. They can assist in grant writing and fundraising. They can help with the newsletter and recipes and just general communication in the CSA. So it takes a community. And then the members raise money to meet the cost of the annual budget, give feedback to the farmers on varieties, quantities, qualities in the crop planning, feedback on how the farm's working as a whole with suggestions for how to move forward to make improvements, contribute recipes and comments, and can participate in the farm on a voluntary basis in field work, in festivals, farm festivals, with family visits. Okay. Another aspect is that besides this new economic approach, we need a new concept for land ownership that addresses long-term preservation of the best farmland in our areas in actual farming use. And historically, we haven't thought of farms as permanent places. You know, the next generation comes along, maybe they don't want to farm, or you know, the farmer gets older and development encroaches, and there's the motivation to, you know, cash that land out to development, typically use, which brings the highest return. And as long as our best farmland goes that route, that may have been, you know, just kind of sad in previous times. But today, when we're running out of fossil energy, it may be more than sad. It may be completely serious to our future. So we need to work with, in these community farms, creating permanent farms. We need to also carry that on through to the land ownership. And there are ways to do that. Basically, what we have to do is we have to take the non-agricultural equity of the property and move it into public ownership, into nonprofit ownership. That's the basic overall need. And there are a couple of ways that this can be done that, you know, have been worked out and there are examples of in the country now. One way is with complete nonprofit ownership, where the land is entirely owned by a nonprofit, and the nonprofit gives a 99-year inheritable lease to the farmer. The farmer owns the buildings, sells them to the next farmer under a limited appreciation. The farmer pays the overhead costs of the lease fee, and in this case, all of the money to take that land into nonprofit ownership would have to be fundraised publicly as tax-deductible donation. So that makes it a little bigger project than the other approach, and this is the approach that we took with our 40 acres in Covelo. So there are 40 acres in Mendocino County that are now a permanent farm. And we purchased and owned the farming use in the property and gave up all other commercial non-farm uses, speculative uses, development uses, and so on. So that we were able to own the agricultural value in the buildings, and the legal tool for doing this is a conservation easement. And the conservation easement has requirements. So one of the requirements in our easement is that the owner of the property be in residence, first of all, and also be showing agricultural income so that they're actively using the land as a food producing resource on behalf of the community. And so the land trust monitors our tax return in order to determine that. And then also we stipulated that the farming had to be organic or biodynamic, that we saw conventional chemical farming as a destruction of the resource and, you know, potential pollution of basically community resource. So we made that a requirement. And there is a formula of appraisal if there is a sale of the property in the future that determines the property's agricultural value based on its potential of making agricultural income. And at that income level, you can afford to capitalize the land, pay for the land only to a certain amount per acre. And that is the requirement and limits the resale value on the land. So it's controlled, it's affordable to an incoming farmer out of their farming income. So the concept was to create permanently affordable farmland as well as permanently active farmland. So, let's see. Okay, energy and resources. I was told that there are about 13,000 people in Covelo, Willits, excuse me. And if you figured our farm is feeding 300 people, I just was trying to get a rough handle on the situation, you know. And so 300 people into 13,000, we come up with about 43 farms that would be needed. And 40 acres of farm, we're talking 1,700 acres of land. Okay, now that's just part of the diet because we're doing vegetables, we're doing meat, doing eggs, but other farms are doing other parts. So, you know, you could double that, you might need to double it, you might need to triple it to get to the total diet. But the facet that's interesting about it is in our farm, the fertility that's maintaining that food production is actually coming out of our farm organism. We don't buy compost off the farm. We have the livestock to create the manure and build the compost out of our farm materials, and that is what supports the vegetable production in the farm. Also, we're using draft horses for soil tillage, and so that is a solar-based source of energy for getting the soil tilled. And then in the case of our particular farm, just over the last 3 years now, we've installed 13 kilowatts of photovoltaic energy, and it's producing about 2/3 of our total energy use for all the buildings and all the water pumping for the agriculture. And so we're after more panels. But, you know, we're starting to get within striking distance, and that is our goal and has been our goal from the beginning in our farm, has been to be able to produce food from a non-fossil energy base. And horses, people, photovoltaic. Okay. The remaining thing we wanted to talk about was community involvement and participation in the farm. And so I think you can already gather from what we said that this is a very different type of farm than what we currently think of as a market farm. And there is a lot of community involvement and participation, and this kind of farm can create the avenue for that. And today I feel as a farmer that as important as growing vital healthy food for people is, I feel at the same time it's almost equally important to create the opportunity for people to come back to the land and experience their connection with it and understand about their agriculture and develop their connection with the land, and to see the land as the giver of their sustenance. Most of us don't get a chance in our society today to see that or live with it at all. We take food off the shelf. It's a pretty separated connection. And when people are actually in the farm and see what goes into it and see what the land gives and see what the people give and see what the animals give, it develops a whole new relationship for people. So we feel that that's a really important part of the farm. And we have some slides of the farm, and Gloria, you were going to talk about the community involvement because, Gloria, I'm in the ground most of the time, except when I escape and do something crazy like this. And Gloria is in the communication arm of the farm as far as maintaining all the connections with members. Okay.
Oh, cool. Is it ready, Jason? Or we'll
Yeah, we're going to try to get get it lined up right. It's going to be hard to fit it all on the screen.
So if he's ready, we'll just talk about the slides a little bit.
Gloria, if you want to use the microphone.
Talk about that.
This is a general picture of the farm mowing in one of the hay fields with a house in the background. Let's go ahead. Here we're starting our plants. We raise all of the plants for the food production on the farm with a very small glass house and cold frames. There we go. So I wanted to give you a picture of what the crops are on the farm a little bit. So here we're harvesting squash, it looks like, and there are other crops planted nearby, corn in the background. Yes. Here's a picture in the summertime of about a quarter of the garden. The food growing is actually, for the vegetable growing in the farm, we're using about 6 acres of the 40 acres. And of those 6 acres, it's only about 4 that are actually in vegetable food production. And that's producing food for about 300 to 400 possibly people. So the rest of the farm is feeding the animals and creating the fertility that allows us to operate those acres.
This is great.
That was the grain, that was a grain field that was pictured there, and with various grains. Right now, wheat, barley, oats, we've grown spelt, kamut, rye, field corn a little bit. And this is a picture with some of the people on the farm experimenting with hand harvesting, and we soon found that you can do it and it's fun, but it'll take a lot of people and a lot of time. So we have some other pictures that will show how we do it now, but this is the egg layer flock, and we've got movable houses that we can tow around to different fields in the farm. Here are the sheep coming up from pasture. So we have a ewe flock of about 10 ewes, and we have 12, 15 lambs a year. Here's a new mom. They're all 3 times that size now in the last 2 months. And here are the cows. There's 6 herd cows, and then the calves from those cows. We milk 1 cow for our own use pretty much at this point.
And all of those people in that slide, as in this one, those I think are 6th graders with one of my apprentices right in the middle there, because we host all these farm classes, school classes that come to the farm, and we've done that for 20 years now. And they stay for 3 days, and they work with us. They milk the cow, they make compost, they feed the animals, and whatever we're doing at the time, and we come together as a group, and we're all eating together, and they're preparing the food, and this is one of their most favorite activities, is bringing in the animals, especially if the animals don't do what they're supposed to, and then they have to chase them and run different places after them.
The goal is to let them sort of settle in. They're on the farm for 2 full days so that they can settle into the routine with feeding and milking and working in the farm and kind of get grounded in it.
So this is a younger group. Mostly we work with 3rd graders, and it's mostly Waldorf schools from around the Bay Area. And this is actually a picture quite a few years ago, and we were just kind of going in a line and rounding up the animals and then bringing them in.
Here are some of the vegetable crops. We grow on 100-foot beds that we do the soil tillage and preparation with the horses, putting the compost out with the horses, shaping the beds with the horses, and then it's sort of a combination of intensive practice after that, because you can see the beds are planted, 4 rows of carrots or beets to a 40-inch bed. So it's, 500 pounds of carrots out of one 100-foot bed.
Stephen and John Jevons got together quite a few years ago and actually compared notes on the production, and our production with John's production was actually quite similar.
This is a starting the season basket in May. It's a flat race from whenever the rain stops and the ground dries out enough to get everything planted so that you have spinach and radishes and stir-fried greens, mustard in there, ready to go in the beginning of May.
So this is a family share. We do a family share and a garden share, and this is the larger share that we start the season with.
And then the cast of characters, of course, changes as the season goes on, and it also increases in total quantity as the season goes on.
So we always plow with the kids when they come, and that's actually our oldest son there, and this is also several years ago. And so he's driving the horses, and they get to hold on to the plow from behind. And actually Stephen's hiding there.
A lot of the soil preparation we do with this disc, which is actually half of a tractor disc that was on the property when I came there. And we cut it in 2 and put a tongue on it and put a weight barrel on it. And here we have 2 horses. I think the next picture we've got 3 on it. And 3 is actually a better approach, especially in larger areas. They can keep working over a longer period without needing to rest. And it just lightens the load on all of them.
Were they chosen for color?
Yeah, we've got 2 different breeds in there. The brown on the front is a Belgian, and then the black and the gray are Percheron. And here we're making beds. This is what the tool we use. It's basically a toolbar, and we can set it down and dig out the path, and it'll create a bed shape. And then we go with hand tools after that. And this is a walking cultivator. We also have a riding cultivator, and the plants that are bigger and take more space, like sweet corn and potatoes and broccoli and winter squash and so on, we put on 30-inch rows because they need that much space to grow anyway. And then we can use the horses to cultivate weeds in between the rows. And it's a different tool than this one, but I don't have a picture of it. And it's got 2 horses on it, and they have to walk with their feet between those 30-inch rows. So it's quite a trick to use, but it can be done, and it saves a lot of work.
So this is digging potatoes with a class, that's probably a class of 6th graders. And that also is a real favorite thing to do. It's just, when the horse starts going down and all these potatoes start popping out, it's immediate action. Let's grab them, man, as fast as we can. And the kids love doing it.
This is the next step after the hand harvest. This is a grain binder, and it cuts the grain. It goes through the carriage on the bottom here, and goes up through here and through a knotter, and it drops it in bundles. And it'll go across the field at a horse's walking pace. And so it's pretty effective. I mean, you can cut an acre, a couple of acres in an hour, hour and a half or so. But then you have to take the grain and feed it into a thresher to knock the grain free of the stalks and the husks and all. So this was the first tool, and they moved from the binder to feeding the grain to a threshing machine, and it was usually powered by steam tractors, for instance, or you can put horses on a merry-go-round and create shaft power that way also. But we don't have that kind of thresher yet, but we do have a small combine. This is an Alice Chambers All-Crop 40, which was made in the mid-40s and it works quite well. And but it does have a little 4-cylinder engine on it.
That binder that we were just looking at, which is what it's called, it's a piece of horse equipment. This was actually a pile of rusted pieces of things, and a German apprentice of ours, quite a few years ago, he drove up to Oregon and bought it as a pile of pieces and brought it down to the farm, and just with one picture put it all together, and then painted it to make sure that it was kept in condition before he left the farm.
Put in Zerk fittings. None of the old equipment had Zerk fittings. He put in Zerk fittings, and neither he or I had ever seen one operate or seen one in person. And he adjusted that thing, and the first time we went into the field with it, we went down the row, it cut the grain and went up through the chute, it bound it, spit out the bundle.
And he and his wife have a farm in Germany, and they're working with horses.
Okay, what's a Zerk fit?
Grease, for grease gun, for lubrication, yeah. Okay, here we're mowing hay. This is Sudan grass, and it grows pretty powerfully in the summertime, but it actually requires not a lot of water. It's not like alfalfa or clover would require more water. So it's a good summer crop, and the animals really like the hay, actually. So this is raking it, getting it gathered into windrows, and then it will be taken to the barn. This is the photovoltaic installation and the corral.
Is that a grid tie?
This one is a grid tie at this point. It has a small battery bank that runs the refrigerator and the water pump in the office, and a couple of lights when the grid goes down. But the battery bank is way too small to carry the whole system. We would have to get 15,000 in batteries into it to do that. So, and we're not sure at this point. Batteries are constantly deteriorating in usage, and hydrogen technology doesn't seem to be quite there or available yet, but maybe might be an alternate. So we're just hanging fire a little bit right now. We may end up watering in the middle of the day, which would not be preferable, but probably could be done.
This is one of our farm potlucks. So we have a potluck in the spring and one in the fall, and often we do, it's in May, and so we do a maypole. It's quite fun. And people come, it's for the weekend, and people come up and we work. Elizabeth knows about that. And we work and then we play. We have a big potluck together in the evening and do music, and Elizabeth comes and plays violin with us. And then the next morning we work some more, but we also talk a lot and have a good time together. another school group. This is actually last fall. I think these are 6th graders, and this is also another favorite activity of theirs, chopping the corn down. Then they feed it. The really fun part is then they take it out and feed it to the cows, and the cows know they're coming, and so they're running like crazy to meet them and grab that corn as fast as they can. This was another farm field day quite a few years ago, and we were sowing corn together. This is one of our apprentices who actually, she got really good at this, and we always share sheep with the kids, and this is when we're sharing with a group of kids, and she also ended up doing a bread share for our members, and Daphne. This is, Stephen figured this out, they're all horses. And so for them to be able to pull that sled,
That's me.
it could be, actually it is!
Yeah, all right.
Cool. So that's the Walter School in Mendocino County. And they have to pull together, so they have to work together to make it work. If they don't, somebody goes falling, or they can't pull the sled. And so then Elizabeth is giving them some weight there to check it out. And then what we do is we split the class in half, and then they try to see who can carry the most. So we keep adding people on, and then after they've done that, and then Stephen will hitch the actual horses up and then give them all a ride, and then they see what the horses can do compared to what they could do. It's really awesome.
This is a hands-on exercise in teamwork, which is the basic concept of our farm.
Horsepower.
Muscle power.
And so that's the ride that they get after they've done the work. And this is usually once we do this after the first day that they arrive and have just gotten out of the cars and been riding for 3, 4, 5, or 6 hours. And so it's a good activity for them and uses up a bunch of energy. And then we collect manure 3 mornings a week from the corral and make compost with it, and so they become a part of that, and they collect the manure and make compost of it. And we remind them that manure is a very important part of the farm, and it should be respected as such.
Gloria terms it the gold of the farm.
And so here they are making compost.
Brown gold. This is brown gold, not black.
And milking the cow, which they all get to do, which is another favorite activity. And cleaning up potatoes once they pick them up out of the ground. And there they are again plowing. And then we always check with them, and talk about different aspects of farming. We try to give them, sort of a grounding in where they are and what they're doing. And this is one of our potlucks. Gathered together, eating food together. Oh, there it is. So I just wanted to thank, I especially wanted to thank Laura. Laura made up all these beautiful, whatever they're called, overhead things, and just been working with us on this presentation. And I want to thank all of you for asking us to share our farming operation with you, and to thank all of you for all the work that you've been doing these last several months. We were here to hear, we came to hear Richard Heinberg in February, and even though, what Richard had to present, such an incredible speaker, was kind of overwhelming, I just went away so energized from the energy in the room. It was so powerful, and such a powerful sense of, here we are together and we're going to do something. And that's a similar energy to what's made it possible for Stephen and I to continue farming the way we do for the last 30 years. Because we've had countless apprentices, farm members, school class visits, friends and family who've shared and cared with us. And we're always carried by that energy. And even though we are doing the day-to-day work on the farm, we always know that there is a support system in the background carrying us and there for us if we need something. And you know, we've been paying attention to what you all have been doing out here a lot through Laura and through Jason, and it just seems to me that there's a great possibility here in Willits with all of the work that you all have been doing to create farms, and you can carry that energy forward and even further, because you know you can gather several families together to create a farm, and by doing that, even though you know there's a challenge of working in community and trying to figure out how to agree with each other and make different decisions, but once you get past that and figure out a plan, there's so much that you can do, because as we talked about with the kids, we're working together and we're sharing the load, and that's what we're always talking about with the kids, and one of the most important points that we like to get across to them, because they've come and they're working with us, and you know, by sharing all that load and someone's doing this and someone's doing that, we get the work done. And not only we get the work done, we can do it with joy, and great joy, and we can be happy. And you know, working together for the same purpose and trying to accomplish things and doing it with joy is just one of the most exciting things that I think we can have. And community farming is about relationships. It's about heart and it's about community. Planting onions with Elizabeth McMahon sitting there, and you know, she's telling us Sven and oldie jokes and keeping us going. She's really good at it, and she made us laugh, and we could work on for hours until we got the onions done. And having Laura Liska come up and meet us before she decided to become a member of the farm, and you know, be interested in who we were and what we were doing. Having other members, Erin Carney, Jane Future, and Stephanie Chatton, come to our biodynamic quarterly meeting and find out what biodynamics is, and find out what's happening on our farm, and David Drell and many people who have come. And knowing that Jan Hinker, sitting in the back there somewhere, knowing that she loves fried green tomatoes. So when we have green tomatoes in the fall, once the tomatoes have frosted, I make sure that Jan gets her supply of green tomatoes, because I know she really likes them, and that's important to her. And then, of course, sharing the farm with so many children, and seeing their faces light up when they milk a cow, and when they figure out how to actually push that wheelbarrow, and then seeing how proud they are when they've actually accomplished it. And they stand a lot taller. You know, there was one kid, actually a ninth grader, quite a few years ago, who had never really done much work. And the teacher said to him, well, it's break time now. And the student, I forget what his name is right now, but he said back to the teacher, he says, you don't understand, you know. I have value here. I'm going to keep working. I'm doing important stuff, you know. So there's no question that there's a lot of work, but there's always room for heart and joy. And I'd just like to close by reading a piece that was on the internet a few years ago. Probably many of you have read it, but it just seems to fit here. And it's a message, part of the message from the Hopis in New Year 2000. I need some water, Mark. Well, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Cool. I really think of your group when I think of this message. To my fellow swimmers, there's a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift, and there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel that they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know that the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore. push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
So, what did you bring?
It's 5 to 8.
Oh, fabulous. We have a whole 35 minutes for questions and answers, so have at it.
Could you describe your irrigation system, both row crops and field crops and wells?
Well, there's 4 wells, and one of them, 2 of them have a horse and a half pumps in them, 25 gallons a minute. One of them has a 50-gallon a minute pump in it, and that's 3 horse. And we run it out through the main lines, and in the beds, if you remember the garden beds there, they're 100 feet long. We have a PVC pipe that has a T and a riser every 15 feet, and it screws together at 45 feet, so it's two sticks, and they screw together, and then it runs the length of the 100-foot bed. And we put these Rainbird spray heads on them. They're like a lawn spray. They make a gentle cone about 15 feet in diameter. So when that thing is running, it covers a strip of 3 beds, 100 feet long, about 15 feet wide. And then we take another one out and set it up when we get the next set of beds again. And we just keep adding them. They stay there for the duration of the crop, and we just use a poly pipe off the main line and stick it on and run it for 30 minutes or so.
Do you have storage tanks?
No storage. No. That line that I just described takes 25 gallons a minute, and so it takes a horse and a half pump to do it. And then the row crops, it's basically the same system, but there's 3 pieces of pipe that plug together, the riser to 30 feet, and there's an impulse sprinkler on it. And so it covers a bigger area, but we have to run it like 4 hours instead of 30 minutes to get this adequate water coverage. But it's a pretty flexible system because we can set it up, it's there for the duration of that crop, and all we have to do is plug the water on it. And then when we want to get the crop out and we want to clear stuff out of the way to work the soil, you can just unscrew it, put it all back in the barn for winter, and you're ready to go again. And I've been using some of those pipes for like 8, 10 years, and they break, but they're pretty easy to fix. So, yes.
How did you make your connection with Bay Area people, and how do you get the food to them?
Well, we made the connection because we had actually started the class visits before we started the CSA. And so we knew people in the Bay Area from having, parents of kids that had been visiting the farm. And at the time...
We started with just 15 families.
Yeah, we started with just 15 families, and at the time there was another person in Covelo that was driving produce to the city regularly, and so we thought, oh, we've even got transportation. And that lasted for about 3 years, and then he went out of business. And so then we now have a van, Econoline 250, that we can haul all the produce to the city in.
Do that once a week then?
Once a week on Friday night, we drive it down.
Our season starts the first week of May, and then we go through Thanksgiving. And so our Tuesday harvest is for Mendocino County, and our Friday harvest is for the Bay Area.
And ideally, you would have your CSA a totally local affair. There are ones in Europe that there's no transportation involved at all. If people have to move it around town, they do it with bicycles. And we actually had one contingent of our members in San Francisco that took it up on themselves to deliver by bicycle down there for a while. But the ideal is to have the CSA in the local community and all of the people that it's feeding coming from that community, then they can come directly to the farm. And that creates also some flexibility in their choices in the foods, because you can have a surplus table, and if somebody doesn't like beets or eggplant, they put it on the table, and the next person that comes along that likes it can take it. And so that helps to balance things a little bit. But at the time that we started, 18 years ago, the whole concept, we were about the first CSA that started to operate in California. So the whole concept was totally new, and finding 15 people we thought was a miracle. But the people in the Bay Area were, ready to make that kind of a change, or could, understand the idealism of it and jumped right in with us.
Well, can I just say something? Our distribution in the Bay Area is different than up here. We send it down in bulk, and then our members down there are organized into cluster groups, so that a representative, there's like 10 different groups, and there's a group in the East Bay, and there's 2 or 3 groups in Marin, and all of our vegetables go to the Presidio. And then they come, a representative from each one of those groups comes at Saturday morning, and they divide it all up, and then they take it back to their respective neighborhoods. So they have to do that 3 or 4 times during the season. Up here, we deliver to Willits. We have drop sites in Willits, Redwood Valley, and Ukiah, and we bring baskets to those locations. And up here, Willits and Ukiah, for a garden share is $16 a week, and the family share is, I think, $26 a week. And we do have opens. Oh, there's someone back there. So.
Back here.
I wanted to ask you about that equipment. Can you still get old equipment like that from the Amish and places like that?
Absolutely. You can get, they have regular auctions of old, originally made for horses equipment. There's one coming up in a couple of weeks in Sisters, Oregon, where they'll have semi-loads of old equipment. You can go up and try to find it and bid on it that way. All of ours kind of came out of the bushes in some spot or another, often for free or for scrap. I think I have about $1,000 in all the equipment, except the combine. That was more, but yeah. And so I brought some books here that'll be up on the table. The Small Farmer's Journal in Junction City, Oregon, if you're not familiar with it, is all about horse farming today. Various parts of the country, there are pockets of people. In Iowa, every year in the Amish centers, they have what they call Horse Progress Days, where there's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people come, and they showcase equipment that is being currently made by Amish manufacturers, and they're putting like hydraulics in things, and using some of more modern sophistication in some of the equipment. And it's just fascinating to what could be done there. Yes.
The other side of the spectrum, modern agriculture. Have you heard of the floating food factories? No. They design and they're building a 5-acre floating food factory off of Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Oh.
And Singapore has signed up for one of these also. And on the top floor are greenhouses that grow vegetables.
Oh, yes.
On the floor below are chickens, on the floor below are pigs, on the floor below is fish and tanks. And they see this as a viable way of producing food in a small space for cities that don't have agricultural land, or even that do, but they think it's going to be an efficient way to produce food. What do you think of that concept?
I would say, is that food? Is that quality food? Is that real nutrition? Are those chickens really chickens? I mean, can you separate a chicken from the earth and it's scratching? And I mean, yeah, you can get some kind of a product and you could eat it. To me, it wouldn't be food. So.
But do they have soil?
Yes.
They have soil on the, they set up some sort of
Yeah.
something.
Well,
Soil.
yeah, but I mean, that's kind of where factory farming is today, and in the organic standards, they tried to legislate that the animals would have a certain access to some fairly natural environment. And I can't imagine how you could have, the maximum production like that coming out of, in the resources. What are the resources to operate that thing, I mean, there must be a lot of things are going to need warmth and ventilation and all kinds of things.
The fish eat the waste, and then people eat the fish. But similar to the kind of things you're doing on your farm, photovoltaics, and I don't know where they get the fresh water, where they have to desalinate the water because this is floating in the ocean. But they have thought this through, and yes, it's definitely not as idyllic as your farm, which is really beautiful, but it's a solution that they're proposing for feeding people. And that, I've read about this before, and I thought, well, if we're actually talking about community-based, food production, then we should have some farm here in Willits that's producing food. We don't even have to bring it into Willits.
Absolutely, that's the way it should be. That's what we're talking about. That's, I hope that some of our, some of these concepts can be applied and we can create farms in Willits. But we need to take care of the farms that exist, and we need to get enough people that want to work in this form and with this concept to, sign up and say, yeah, we'd like to create this kind of a farm, and we'll be the base to get it started. And we need to plan that a little ahead so that, there are enough people to carry a farm as opposed to trying to start a whole bunch of farms and then not having enough people to carry it. So I'm hoping that maybe it can work that way. And
Many CSA farms have been started by members, not by farmers.
Yeah.
So groups of people have gotten together and said, hey, we want somebody to grow our food. So, and we have this property here. Now we need a farmer. So where's our farmer? Okay, you're our farmer. Let's do this and let's come together. And that's really awesome. I mean, you guys can do that. Stephen, there's a question.
Okay, I just want to say, if we're no longer able to manage all the land we manage now mechanically, there's going to be a lot more land, that can be used, that will, in a way, become available. So I would anticipate some, sharing. Yes?
Yeah, sort of along those lines. You said that you're out in the earth, dirt every day, and your wife is handling the business side more. And you've mentioned apprentices and your son, but how many people does it take for you to produce food for was it 300 families?
Yeah. Well, 300
40
people,
acres,
300 people.
Yeah. How many people does it take, and how many horses?
Well, we're working with 4 workhorses, and we probably could do it with 2 or 3, but 4 gives you some flexibility that you don't have with 2. If you come out one morning and one of your horses got a sore foot, you're down for the day. If you got 3 horses, you keep going. If you need to do a lot of work fast, you can put 2 teams in the field. And so 4, and this is a typical ratio. Most of the Amish farms are in the 40 to 80 to maybe 120 acre range. Typically 4 to 6 head of workhorses. Typically 10 people, maybe. Yeah, in our case, no. We're working with, we could do it with 5 people experienced, but we're often working with 6 or maybe occasionally 7 in the middle of the season, depending, but we're also, each year, we're often starting with people that are totally new to farming. And so there's a tremendous learning curve, to getting, and there's also a culture shock curve. So, we've chosen to operate the farm that way to create an opportunity for people to get, hands-on experience and develop their skills and find out if that life is what they're called to, because you have to be called to this work to do it, I think. But, you
And
know,
many of our former apprentices do have their own farms in one way or another. Not all of them, but even if they don't have their own farms, they have a much greater appreciation for the earth and what comes out of the earth and how to take care of that and how to pass that appreciation on to others.
yes.
I have a question about your composting procedures and how much time and energy that takes. And what, like, you have a large farm, I'm never gonna have anything like that, but is there a location for that?
Yes.
Or is it in various places?
No, we have a compost yard that's adjacent to the corral that you saw in the photovoltaic picture. There was that big corral. The horses, the cows, and the sheep are all bedded there at night, and so they manure over the night. And so our first chore, Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, is to go in there. If there are 5 of us on the farm, one of us goes and does the animal feeding and the milking, the animal chores. The other 4 of us head for the corral. And we pick up the manure, and it's only about 50 feet or so out to the compost yard. And we just take it out and start building piles on one end of the yard, and as the year goes on, we end up at the other end.
But you add in whatever you're not using.
Crop waste and straw and everything to make a balanced compost. And then we also inoculate the piles with biodynamic compost preparations, because we're trying to create the highest quality compost that we can so that we can create the highest quality food.
And those piles are, 6 to 8 feet across and about 12 feet long, and
Yeah.
there's about 12 to 15 of them in the compost yard. And they generally break down, if they're made properly, which, a really important part of making them properly is putting the right moisture in all the materials that you put in when you make them. And that's really, really crucial, because often it won't go in later, even if it pours really crazy. So, and then, we just start using them. And we have a manure spreader.
There's 4 or 5 tons to a pile, and we're putting about 10 to 15 tons of compost an acre back out, so we need 40, 50.
The year to break it down?
6 months.
6 months.
For those 300 people that you're supplying food to, roughly what percentage of their annual diet do you think that is?
Depends on how they're eating, but I don't know.
10%,
I would
50%?
no. I would say a third to possibly a half, depending on how they eat. If they want to eat mainly vegetarian, well, and then in our case, the people that do eat meat can also get meat out of the farm.
And from November to May, why they're totally on their own? Other than what they might have set aside, stored?
Yes, except that in San Francisco, what we've done is we partnered with another farm, actually the farm that supplies fruit. They're in the Central Valley, Cape, where it's warm, and they can produce vegetables in the winter. So members that want to go on and get their winter vegetables from Jeff and Annie, Good Humus, set that up and do that during the winter. And then when it comes back around to May, then their vegetables come from us and their fruit comes from Jeff and Annie. And so we've worked out a way of covering it that way. I think in this climate, you could do winter vegetables and storage vegetables, and you could try to set yourself up for it, You'd have to, it almost might need to be another farm, because you'd have to grow all the fall root crops and storage crops, and you'd need a good sized area to do that, to supply those people. And then fresh things would be more in the realm of like chard and kale, as far as greens, and lettuce for a good part of the winter you could also do. And other than that, you'd need a certain amount of cover. But this month is actually the lowest month. So, and because all of those winter things are starting to bolt now. So, we've got a lot of blossoms and seed stalks. So actually that's what we're eating we cut off the buds on all of the brassica plant family and just stir fry them. They're
But this
quite
year,
good.
because it wasn't very cold and we didn't have very much rain during the winter, our carrots lasted all of the winter. Usually they get wet and soggy and then they get frosted and they get cold, but that didn't happen until now. And so we've never had carrots this long and so consistently. It's been kind of neat. There was a question way back
So it would
there.
take some planning and doing, but I think it could be done. This lady here.
Oh, I just didn't understand the numbers that you said about how, that I heard you say that 4 to 6 horses would be optimum on a 40 to 120.
No, I was saying 46 farms.
4 to 6 horses
excuse me.
on the farm, but I didn't get the people ratio thing.
About 5 experienced people, yes.
It really makes a difference with the experience of people involved, and also not only the experience, but the desire to work and the agreement. You know, I mean, often, as Stephen said, so it's sort of hard for us to really answer that question so much because often we're working with inexperienced and sometimes people who are not sure totally that this is what they want to do, and so they're going through this, this stage where they're questioning. So.
Yes.
I was wondering how the season is for the compost production. Do you like store the straw in the barn over the winter and use it the following year?
Yeah.
And what time of the year do you spread the compost, and how do you keep it in between when you make it and when you use it?
Well, we try to finish the pile with straw and soil, and so it does shed water to a certain degree.
So it overwinters for the most part?
Yeah, so it overwinters outside for the most part. And you could tarp it, if you want to protect more water, keep more water off of it. I just don't like the breathing conditions there, so I leave it open. And a lot of the compost gets put on in the fall in preparation for the next year's planting, because in the spring, this part of the spring, the early part of the spring, if you put compost in the soil, for one thing, you don't have time because you're in between rainstorms and it's too wet. And for two things, the soil microorganisms are slower, it's not warmed up, they're not active, and so they don't digest the compost, and you can actually create some imbalances. So we tend to be putting compost onto the soil starting more after April or in April, and through the summer and the fall. The straw can be stored inside the barn or even outside and tarped or thatched. I mean, if you've got a really good big straw pile, it won't get totally wet into the center. And if you're continuing to make compost, you can keep using it off the outside and kind of keep up with it to some degree. Yes, in the back there. Oh, yeah, you're right in line with each other.
Are the shares purchased considered taxable income? Because like you said, you get all the shares right away, so you get $50,000 right then and there.
Well, I mean, we just pay normal income tax, for farming. Is that what your question is? I mean, it's just registered, it's accounted as income.
And is that different from, you said, as farmers? Is that different from people? Expenses. Yeah, so you use it as expenses, or?
It's income before expenses, after you take out expenses.
Yeah, it's income.
Okay, so
then,
most of that's going towards expenses, and then?
The money that people put into the farm operation via the share cost, yeah, all of that money goes to pay for the farm operation, which includes, all the materials, energy that we have to buy, although that one's going down slightly. I don't know what we do with peak oil. We get local, which is the way it should be in the first place. Yeah, and to compensate the farmers and the other people working in the farm, and also to fund a capital fund in the farm for creating the infrastructure, you know, fencing and wells and buildings, whatever needs to be done, equipment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So if someone or some group was to acquire 20 acres in the valley and wanted to put in the infrastructure and acquire the horses and the knowledge to be able to generate food for themselves or others investing in, how long would it take from start to production?
All depends upon your skills. Again, you know, how much you know and how much you need to
The average person who might be able to come together with people who had some skills in the agricultural area.
I think that's really different, you know, just it depends upon the individual and their, you know, how they operate and how they live, you know, because I've seen apprentices who have spent 9 months with us and then they have gone and started their farm immediately. And then I've seen completely different scenarios. So I would say that's, you know, really hard.
For less than 2 years.
Yeah. It could be less.
If you're motivated,
it could be within towards the end of the year, depending on how fast you could assemble everything. I mean, radishes are your fastest crop. 28 days, you know, and you can grow them in the spring and the fall. But you know, potatoes, they've got to go in the next month or so. Less, actually, a couple of weeks. About the window. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to think about our share. Somebody had the question. So we got a full share for 6 years, and I have 5. We have a family of 5, and I often had my brother living with us. And once it really got going, I had to work hard to make sure we ate it all. You know, it was a pretty good share for us. And then I'd always on Thursday I'd buy like stuff that wasn't in the basket at the farmer's market, like lettuce. So I'd probably spend an extra $10 on vegetables, and then I'd buy a lot of fruit. So that just, if you wanted an idea. And we don't have picky eaters. You know, everybody eats stuff, so it was a lot. I had to work hard. Sometimes I had to make a big pot of soup.
Especially zucchini, right? You're giving away zucchini.
Yeah. Well.
So Elizabeth, now you get a garden share, but you do some of your own gardening.
Yeah, a little garden.
And so you're doing the garden share plus your own garden, and then that works.
Elizabeth, for how many people did you say?
Mine's in the area of a testimony. 17 years ago, I brought my 8-year-old out to their farm, and we slept out in the barn with the sheep and the cows and so on. And if there's any way you can take a little time to just go out and offer a little help and just hang out with these folks. These are national treasures, as young as they look. They truly are a unique and wonderful experience for you, just to go out there and be.
Sweet. We have I mean, if you want to come visit, we have this, as I said, the Spring Potluck Memorial Weekend, and that's open. We open that to our members and families, just anyone who's interested in visiting. Thank you, Carla. Back in the back.
What about your grains? Do you grow grains for human consumption?
We do for our own, you know, we would like to do more. We would like to eventually be able to do it for our members. But as Stephen mentioned, for our members in San Francisco, one of our former apprentices grows grains, and she provides those shares. She sends down shares once a month. And
so you don't grow grains or the food?
Well,
we do for ourselves.
We have like 800, 900 pounds of grain left from last year, but our cleaning equipment at this point doesn't get everything out, and so using it for people, we have to sort by hand until we can run down the equipment. You know, this is just one of the problems of trying to become complete in the whole process. You know, most of the equipment now is giant stuff, thousands and thousands of dollars. So we're back to smaller scale stuff that we hope could even be powered with solar, electric, or horses. And we just haven't found a way to research to get the equipment that we need yet. So.
But you're growing the grain on your property in lagoons and not for human consumption for 300 people?
No. I don't know actually how much area that would take. We are doing about 2 acres of grain the last 3 years now. We've been hitting that pretty consistently. And 2 acres of grain will put out 1,000 to 1,500 maybe pounds of grain. And I haven't tried to calculate how many people that would feed. It would feed a lot. I mean, that's a lot of grain.
And we do more or less of that all according to how many people we have working with us and the water availability. You know, growing the vegetables for 10 months is a huge amount of energy expended. It takes a great deal of time. And so, but always our ideal is to create a balance and to have all of these things on the farm. And so part of that is being able to have the fencing and to have those areas closed off so that the animals don't get in there, or having the water and having time to move those water lines so that we can get that. And with farming with horses, in the summertime when the ground is quite dry, we have to pre-irrigate before we can get in with the horses. And so then that's more water lines to move. I mean, just like raising our chickens, we would ideally like to be pasture, grazing them, and do poultry pasture, which involves moving them quite a bit. We just don't really have enough area and or time and labor to be able to move them. So we're buying grain, which is really expensive. We don't like doing it, but we're moving towards being able to provide that grain for them, which is our ideal.
My farmers have to get back to the farm and grow my food. So I'd like to take about 3 more questions and then we'll wrap it up. So I think I saw like 3 hands. There was someone in the back.
Following much of what you were just talking about, the other farms that you're cooperating with for the San Francisco Associates, do they have the potential capacity to be able to provide your Willits Associates with fruit and with grain?
Well, actually, you know, Stephen forgot to mention, there's actually another farm that works with us in Covelo, and one of those farmers is in this room right now, and they are providing chickens. Is she hiding? Christine. And, you know, when she and her husband Greg last year started doing chicken shears for members in the city, and we started that slow because we wanted to see how we could do that. And then, you know, the idea was, well, see if we can build up more to do that. And I don't know what that answer is for them, but then the grain and the fruit, we tried a few years ago to do fruit with Jeff and Annie for Mendocino County, and the struggle there was the transportation and making that transportation affordable and feasible, you know, actually getting it over here, where San Francisco, they drive it to San Francisco and it's a part of something that they do, and we don't have to worry about that. We're trying to work with some other growers in the county that we can do that here, and that's our aim. And we're talking like to Chris and Steffi out in Philo, and they've got all kinds of fruit trees that they're starting and will be producing in a few years. But we would like to do more of that within the county, most definitely.
That's definitely the thing, is to network, you know, within the area as close as we can, but it's just going to depend on who's out there that already kind of has a start and would want to work in this format, you know. And so, you know, Covelo isn't local to Willits even, but 40 miles is way better than, you know, 1,400 or whatever the food system is. So I think that's what we'll have to do, is just kind of, you know, see what resources are there in terms of land and people, and, you know, but those growers need to know if there is a community that, you know, wants to work with them for food. And like Gloria said, we've talked with a few people that we're aware of, and I'm sure we're not aware of everyone.
Do you butcher your for sale, or do?
Well, people...
We work with the local butcher to, you know, sell buy the animals, and buy the animals live and then...
You can have us do it, or you can have them do it.
I see.
We have the skills to do it, and we still do the sheep, actually. We do the lamb. But it's gotten to be quite a bit more work than we can do on top of trying to build the farm infrastructure. And that's back to the question earlier, how long does it take? I mean, we've been working at this for 30 years, you know. And it started as kind of a cattle ranch. That was what was there, and with buildings that were fairly run down. And, you know, now it's producing way more than it did.
But to
But
add to your
it is a
question,
process.
you know, we've taken 30 years and we're still building.
Yeah, you could do it faster.
Yeah, I mean, we had absolutely positively no capital whatsoever, and until we started the CSA, which was a ways into what we were doing, then we actually started to get an income. Before that time, we didn't have an income, and so we, in the very first years, we were taking people's fences down and using their fences and pounding nails to be able to do what we needed to do. And so, you know, if you have some capital and, you know, and several families, it was just Stephen and I and, you know, 3 little babies. And so that, you know, it's quite different than if you have a couple of families working together on it. It's huge. And then you also have, you know, maybe a support group that's working with you. Then you can do tremendous, you know, you can do it in 6 months if you want to. You know, it just depends on the variables.
I want to add there that 20 acres is, you know, if you're considering horsepower, you could do that with 1 horse, maybe about 1 horse, it would be all you could carry, you know. So really 40 acres is, I mean, there was a reason that the homesteaders got 40 acres. That was what, with horsepower, you could work with, you know, and then they allowed people to double that with a tree claim or something, you know, because as you get it developed and you can do more horses, there was a time when tractors were coming in and there were USDA pamphlets that were promoting multiple hitch farming with like 12 and 16 horse hitches, you know, and they were comparing them to the amount of land you could cover with a tractor of those days, you know. So there are some different scales involved there, but I think, you know, certainly you can grow a ton of food on 20 acres, but if you also want to create the fertilization, the fertility out of it, and you want to create the energy to operate that land out of it, then I think, you know, you want to look more towards the 40-acre zone.
Lynn Miller of the Small Farmers Journal, he's the editor of the Small Farmers Journal. It's based out of Eugene, Oregon. He spoke at EcoFarm Conference a number of years ago, and it was when the USDA, they were doing all that stuff with organic certification and kind of getting involved and getting in the way. And he, you know, wanted to emphasize that one of the most important things that we need to look at in farming, besides organic, is scale. You know, what can we really do? You know, and what can we really do that's sustainable for us and who we are and what our capacities are. And, you know, I mean, he said a whole bunch of things, but that really stood out to me, particularly with what we're doing, you know, and how we're farming. It made a lot of sense.
I just have a question. A non-Japanese system, approximately 80 or 90% of his crops are carbon crops to go into compost to keep the soil fertile. And your system using manures, how does that come out?
Well, boy, I've never tried to, you know, find what the statistics would be on that. All I can tell you really, I guess, is that, you know, with that complement of animals of, you know, in our particular farm, we can maintain the fertility pretty well, I think, you know, with cover crops and the manure. The manure, traditionally, classically in farming, has a value for rejuvenating the soil that plant material doesn't have. It's different. I mean, nature has plant material and animal material, and there's a reason for that. And so I think that, you know, the manures would maybe let you let up some on the plant material requirement, but you would still need, you know, the complement of plant material. It's in a compost pile, I think 60% carbon, 40% nitrogen. And you could look at the manure as a nitrogen material, more or less, although it does have carbon in it. And you could look at the straw as the carbon element. So you need quite a bit of straw, of carbon material. But, you know, and then green plants are somewhere in between in their composition. So, but I don't have any numbers.
There's also the basic thing. You got 40 acres and you're doing 6 acres intensively vegetables.
Right.
I mean, you can look at that ratio. That's kind of, isn't that kind of related to what she's talking about?
Yeah, what Stephen's doing, he changed a couple of years ago, with this couple in Pennsylvania, Eric and Ann Nordell. They have this system that's totally awesome. And so 2 of those 6 acres are in fallow. And so we're constantly rotating what's a crop and what's in fallow to rejuvenate, but also to help work on the weeds and to get rid of the weeds. So there's less time spent in weeding.
Okay, so the 4 acre garden on a 40 acre farm.
Yeah. What?
4 acres in vegetables, but you want to think about that 6 acres as providing those 4 acres.
It's a rotation strip. There's a 100-foot wide strip that's cover crop and soil building and weed control for a whole year. And adjacent to it is the vegetable crop strip. And then the next year the vegetables move in on the cover crop strip. What was the vegetable strip adjacent becomes cover crop for a whole year. And the Nordells have had really great success with this in actually getting rid of their weed seeds to the point where they can manage, I think,
6 acres.
6 acres.
Market garden with horses and just the 2 of them.
Yeah, and they do it with
and they do the market.
Everything in their system.
They don't have any kids.
Their whole system is in 36-inch rows, and it's all row cultivated. You know, so yeah.
In your basket, do you, obviously vegetables and potatoes and stuff, how much of the basket includes, is there meat included, eggs are included, what, are any of that stuff?
Those are separate shares.
Those are separate shares. So the prices were just for the vegetable type crops. Okay.
All right. I really want to thank
so excited to have the opportunity that people would move towards community farms.
Yeah. Please come and join us.
Federal government. Well, I should go down and talk to him. Muscle power.